Court. Now, the first wave of challenges to President Trump's executive orders are now being heard by that court. Today, the court handed down 2 wins to the Trump administration. They were narrow and legally complicated, but they were victories nonetheless. This marks the 3rd time in less than a week that the justices have sided with the Trump administration against lower court judges. I'm joined now by Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson, who is the queen of breaking down super complicated stuff that's very hard to explain. So, Jessica, you got your work cut out for you today. Let's start with what's going on with deportations. We know the president wants to deport Venezuelans and others using what's called the Alien Enemies Act, which is from back in the 1700s. What's the court have to say on that?
Well, as you said, this was really a procedural ruling. And what the court said in a per curiam opinion is basically that those deportations can continue for now. They basically undid a pause, but that was really because they thought that those challenging the deportations hadn't sued in the right place. They said the right place to sue is where you are being detained. And we're talking about moving, for instance, from D.C. to Louisiana or Texas, where people are being held. The court also said that when it comes to these particular claims, the way to try and petition the government is to file something called a writ of habeas corpus. Those are hard, but the court also said everybody who is subject to deportation and detained under the Alien Enemies Act, that they need due process. They need notice and an opportunity to be heard. All of which is to say, this is not, Alex, as you know, a substantive ruling on President Trump can use the Alien Enemies Act, or he can't use the Alien Enemies Act, or it's always okay if we're in wartime. It's something much more specific about where you sue and what kind of suit you bring.
So it sounds like to be continued on that one when they come forward with more suits. Meanwhile, another sort of narrow ruling on this idea of probationary employees. We know President Trump and Elon Musk got rid of a whole lot of federal workers coming in there, and they sued, saying you can't do this. What did the court say?
So here what the court said is the wrong people sued. And so, yes, this looks like a win for the Trump administration. But, Alex, you and I have talked a lot about something called standing, meaning that it can't be anybody who walks into federal court and complains about, for instance, something the federal government is doing, like firing people. It has to be people who have an injury in fact, who are truly harmed, and whose rights can be vindicated if they win. In this case, we were talking about nonprofit groups, and the court said that they didn't have standing to sue. This still leaves in place a different court order that had affected these federal workers, but that court order was more limited. All of which is to say, again, looks like a big win, but it's, again, really this kind of nitty-gritty procedural, who can actually walk into federal court challenging these firings.
All right, another ruling today that didn't involve the Supreme Court and will probably go to the Supreme Court involves the Associated Press. We know President Trump was frustrated with Associated Press reporters when they refused to call what he calls the Gulf of America. They call it the Gulf of Mexico. He said basically, get out, you can't be part of the press pool, the small press pool anymore. What did this lower judge say?
You can say get out, but you can't say get out because you refuse to do what I want you to do, which is a long way of saying when it comes to the First Amendment, the government absolutely has the power to say when it comes to certain areas, like let's talk about Air Force One, Alex. Let's talk about the Oval Office. Let's talk about the White House briefing room. Obviously, these are all confined places where you can't let everybody in. But what the judge is really saying here is you can't say get out because I don't like your viewpoint. That's called viewpoint discrimination. When I teach the First Amendment, I say to my students, that's the worst type of discrimination because the government doesn't get to pick winners and losers. It doesn't get to say, you can cover this because I agree with what you're saying or I agree with your perspective. So can you limit space? Yes, but do so in a content neutral way, meaning not because I don't like that you won't use Gulf of America.
So they could come up with some other random excuse?
Well, I would say if it's a random excuse, that might look pretextual, but you could come up with another reason, like we're going to have a lottery system, something that applies to everybody. Think of a parade. You can't say everybody can have a parade, but just not if you like the Lakers. You can say nobody gets a parade from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. You can't say nobody gets a parade from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. unless it's about the Dodgers, because we love the Dodgers.
All right, interesting. And we'll see if that one goes to the Supreme Court, where they could issue a narrow ruling that doesn't really say anything. We'll find out. Jessica, thank you so much. Appreciate the lesson. I feel like I just went to school. Thank you so much.